Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is December 7, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today with Lisa Carr. Lisa, where in the heck are you calling in from?
Well, now I live in Rockland County, which is about maybe 30 miles north of the George Washington Bridge, in a
How
little
cool,
town called Chestnut Ridge, Rockland County.
how cool is that? The first question, Lisa, is what is the best thing for a human being?
Expansion.
Wow, I never get that word. That is a cool word. What's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Uh, Personally, I'm a voracious reader, and even though I'm also an adjunct, a college educator. I read a lot of novels, and this is a really great way for me to learn the written word from historical fiction. I read a lot of other kinds of stuff, but I mean, I love I love imagery, I love film, but I reading is one of the ways that I feel that I learn uh, the human story over and over again.
Beautiful. You're great with words too, Lisa. I really felt you communicated that well and you're articulate. Just to go off on reading for a second, did you become a reader more so because your parents did it as an example? They told you to do it or on your own?
My parents, my dad read Edgar Casey. Remember
Wow.
Edgar Casey? But he didn't really broadcast that to any of his friends. No, my parents were not uh, talkative about reading. My mother, as far as I know, my mother didn't really read very much. But I've always, ever since I was really a little kid, I remember actually the first word. You know, the first word I sounded out on paper. It was like a Mutt and Jeff cartoon or something. Was the word California.
Oh my God,
I
that
remember,
is cool.
I remember going up to my dad, and I think I was 3.5 or 4, and I said, you know, Dad, California, and that was like that was the first word I actually read.
Epiphany, that was a revelation. So, why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, we've evolved to do that. Our brains have been selected over and over again to incorporate. I would imagine. Um, I don't know if it's larger and larger portions of data, but we have to keep adapting as human beings to um, subsume what we're living in, but also what we are sort of manifesting, you know, as we go along. So, you know, like for example, when we didn't have an amygdala until we really started having to deal with anxiety and fear, and we create these portions of our brain that you know, we're hardwired, for example, to you know, religion, blah blah blah, and stories. We're hardwired to kind of create things to to make narratives around. We are a narrative species, and also to believe in something, to get our animated corpses out of bed in the morning. You know, so we have to always. And Darwin said it himself. He said, um, in order to really have to realize a large idea, you have to collect a whole bunch of data, like way more than you need, and then yeah, and then you can start like rooting around through it and use what you know what you want. But I know that for some people, collecting data can be an intimidating idea. I remember when I did my master's, my MFA, my master's in fine arts, in my mid 50s, and most of my colleagues were. There's only 7 of us in this program, and everybody else was at least 30 years or 25 or 30 years younger than me. And when it finally came to doing our thesis project, and I had collected an enormous amount of media in preparation for it, I remember one of my colleagues was really overwhelmed and intimidated by this. And I remember saying to her, "Look, don't worry about it. It's just media. That's all
Yeah.
it is. It's just, you don't have to worry about it." And, you know,
Yeah,
it's so long story short.
that was good. No, it really communicated well. And fill in the blank, Lisa. I don't know what I think until I
Experience it.
good.
Uh,
Do
what?
thoughts. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's experience, but for example, you know, with the, I work a lot with the themes of refugees and misplaced and displaced. And now I don't know what it's like to be, I actually don't know what it's like to be a refugee, obviously. But I do know what it's like to be displaced. And so, you know, my background when I was in my teens was in acting. I was a method actress at a young age, and um, I studied different kinds of methodology, Uta Hagen and a little Stanislavski and this and that. But one of the things you learn is how to take an experience. You know, if I had to emulate someone who had done a heinous crime, for example, maybe I'd never done a heinous crime, but I've done things for which I feel extremely guilty about. So you can kind of attach those things. So that's the kind of experience I think I'm talking about, is that everything is connected, and you can attach an experience that might not have the amplitude of of a truly heinous, for example, crime, or an amazing experience, but you can kind of find your way into it in that way.
Beautiful. Do thoughts create emotions?
Yeah, I mean, uh, unfortunately, we're really victimized, aren't we? Just so victimized by our brains in that way. I
Can
think so.
can humans think without language?
Oh yeah, I really think that at a certain moment, I teach cross-cultural perspectives as an adjunct professor, and it's a very introductory course to introduce students to cultural anthropology. And we know that at a certain moment, uh, oh, okay, here I'm going to digress for a minute. Remember Soupy Sales?
Love them.
Sales. Well, Dave was saying, my husband Dave was saying the other day that he woke up one morning and he remembered White Fang. I
Yeah.
remember White Fang, and Dave was saying, he goes like, oh, you know, you ask him a question, hey, what do you want for breakfast? And and the thing is, he wasn't verbal yet. You know, White Fang, Soupy Sales wasn't verbal yet, but we were thinking anyway. We just didn't. Language is something that we've just simply created to define an object that we want to tell somebody else about that object, and that's what culture is, and that's what language is. And so obviously of course we were thinking way before we figured out a way to roll our tongues around, and even, you know, and cuneiform and that kind of thing, writing and speaking. Yeah, of course we were thinking. Yeah.
Chomsky says a language is not just words, it's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history of what community is.
Mm.
What do you do when language doesn't work, when language breaks down?
Uh, listen is one thing.
Nice.
Um, as a vocalist, sometimes I don't always improvise. It's fun to improvise. I'm very text heavy in what I do as a um, you know, a legitimate vocalist, meaning following a score. But there are moments when you know, as I believe that our vocal cords, that they're really there to bear the weight of emotion, human emotion.
Yeah.
And of course, words, uh, we can use words to illustrate and define and to put a point across. But if you hear a vocal, for many years, I worked with well, at the time they were calling them special needs
Yeah.
populations, kids
Yeah.
who autism spectrum, all kinds of populations that, and many of them were nonverbal, but they made sounds that obviously they were telling you something.
Yep.
And uh, the, I happen to be very sort of interested and also accessible to this kind of teaching modality. We called it performance skills, where a student might not be able to speak a word, but you can help them to like breathe into maybe a homemade instrument, or and so yeah. I think listening has a lot to do with when speech breaks down. There is a time when you and I'm not very good at this, but there's a time when you have to back up and cool out and let somebody just run through their lexicon of
Yeah.
whatever they're feeling. And in a perfect world, wouldn't that be great if we all did that? You know.
Some real great tips on conflict resolution there. Listen, chill out, improvise.
Mhm.
Okay, so this is a stupid question. I know it's both, and it depends, but just your hunch or your feeling. Are we more feeling beings or are we more thinking beings?
Whether we admit it or not, um, we're more feeling beings. We've created a whole front. Uh, as an educator, I know this. We've created these intellectual frontages that can mask. There's so much subtext going on all the time, just all the time. So I do feel that whether we admit it or not, uh, we are feeling beings, and those things, whether our feeling is base or exalted, it drives us. It drives us. If you look at, if you hauntology, the idea of, that there are specters just in your past that you're hauling along with you. Looking in the rearview mirror, as as our friend. My mind is going blank, but we look at the present in a rearview mirror. We look backwards into the future. Just this idea that we are. We've created we're not instinctual the way animals are, and somehow, and I can't explain why, but our emotional through lines um, just happen to dictate the way that we instinctually choose different pathways. That wasn't very articulate, but
No, that was good, Lisa. And no one ever brings up McLuhan before I do. So
okay, sorry.
you get that was super cool because he called it rear view mirrorism. And that's right. Walk forward, looking in the rear view mirror. But actually, these are two questions from Alan Turing in the 1950s. First one, is thinking a function of the soul?
Well, first you got to define, and you'll get so many different definitions of what the soul is. If you're an atheist, or if you're a religious person, or if you practice Buddhism, all of these belief practices have different, I suppose, ways into what the soul is. Now, repeat the question, please, Jerry,
Is thinking a function?
of the soul, of the soul. Um, it's that's something that I don't have the that I don't have the wherewithal to expound on, but we are, in Butoh, Butoh, a little bit
Yes.
about Butoh, where they talk about, and I mentioned this earlier, it's the idea of the animated corpse,
Yes.
that we have to, it's a bag. We live in this bag of bones, right? That's mostly water or whatever, and but we have to animate it like every day.
Yeah.
To animate it, we have to come up with reasons. So I think thinking is something that for want of a better way of describing it, that we have selected in terms of our evolutionary striving. We're so imperfect, but we created thinking in order to animate this bag, this big
Yeah.
bone bag. So you know, you literally have to do it to get out of bed in the morning. You got to, whatever your ritual is, you know, or whatever your
Yeah.
impulse is, and that takes a mental, it takes a mental form, I think.
Yeah. I love that you turned me on to this animated corpse idea, and we'll get into that more. It's really beautiful.
Okay.
And 2 words. And the second Turing question is, can machines think?
Well, if you think in terms of this whole hurried race to post-humanism, they are on the verge. Those guys and those gals who work with, you know, really um, sophisticated technology, they are on the verge, I think, of creating algorithmic uh, um, AI, or I don't know what these things are. These are things that it's not so far away from molecular architecture. Okay, there are scientists who can actually screw around with molecules, and it's quite beautiful, and it's a way of architecting something that's already alive. So on the other side of the coin, um, there's this movement towards divesting ourselves of this stuff, and they are, you know, things like now, I think in Japan and different places, where you can actually hire or you can rent like a robot or something at home that will care for the aged or things like
Yeah.
that. Well,
Oh,
but
yeah.
they actually are, you know, if you get to the point where your digital numbers are so spectacular that you can create these algorithms that are based on human thought patterns, I suppose eventually, yes, they will be able to, um, uh, what would it be called? Not imitate it, but I don't know, generate this kind of electrical, you know, that it's electricity, right? It's we have,
Yes.
it's constantly, you know, it's exhausting, but yeah,
You
I do.
That's good, Lisa. You pulled a white fang there. You said it will create this like that. Ruh-roh. So, do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
As an artist, well, I have to pursue meaning. I mean, I don't have really, if I can't, and I've gone through periods, and as you know, artists will go through these periods maybe where they're regenerating, or they don't quite have the next thing, and they have these huge, oh my God, these huge, you know, oh my God, whatever, you know, and so you have to find meaning, and
Yeah.
but there are, it also depends on your trajectory as a person, and um, my for various reasons, a lot of the experiences that I had growing up attach, you know, we imprint, right? You know, constantly. We're so gullible, we're so impressionable, we're so porous. It's a beautiful thing, and it's a big curse also. And I had some traumatic experiences, as many people do, and those traumas um, in not only enriched my life as an artist, but actually sort of dictated the kinds of things that I'm interested in. So even though it's so great when those few times in my life when I've really experienced real joy, it's so great. But as you know, and this is not a new idea, that the interesting kind of conflict there is that the more you the higher your joy ratio, the more you, at the same moment that you're feeling this joy, the more you know that when you flip the record over, the more you know that there's this other very deep pocket of the opposite of that,
Yep.
and that I don't I don't complain about that, But that is one of the things that I'm a Libra. I'm not into astrology necessarily, but I
Yeah.
am a Libra. And I tend to follow that kind of weird, constantly trying to balance,
Yeah.
So yeah, meaning. Short
You're,
answer.
you're also what, by saying balance, I find just talking to you for 20 minutes now, is that you're a comprehensivist. You want to know both, and like Pascal, the mathematician, he said, in order to understand anything, you have to understand this end of the spectrum and that and everything in between. So that's hard, and McLuhan actually nailed it. He said, understanding is not having a point of view.
Yes.
It's understanding is understanding the big picture.
Yeah, and I'm constantly harping at my students about this. And I don't know if you've ever taught, but 2 or 3 weeks into the semester, the first week it's always promising. They're like, they're there for you. And then 2 or 3 weeks in, they're like, but I constantly am telling them, you have to look at a story or a narrative or anything. You have to look at it from every perspective that you can. And I'm always, and some of them catch on to that. And I'm always, very, very happy when they do.
That is good. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating it?
Well, we're not conscious of having created it, and we are still creating it.
Yeah.
And we're also uncreating it. When walking backwards to this idea of post-humanism and the flat image and the fact that it's wonderful. Isn't this magical? I can talk with you. I'm in Rockland, you're in California. It's like fantastic. We used to see this on Star Trek or whatever. And it was like, oh my God, they're talking. They're looking at each other on a video. But the opposite, the opposite side of that is that the flat image is actually and this is, again, I'm not introducing any big new ideas, but it's already having an effect on the brains of really little kids whose parents don't have any sort of, it's like there's a great little video I show my kids towards the end. I do a little media theory class, and there's a little part of a video I show called the social dilemma, and it's how algorithms, how the big kahunas are creating these algorithms that addict you, keep triggering your dopamine, blah 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 blah, and this has to do with answering this part of the question that you asked, which is that we keep evolving. And actually, it takes a really, really long time to, evolve something major,
Yeah.
But it takes a surprisingly small amount of time to start deteriorating by creating this way. There's actually, are you a Star Trek person? Did you used to watch it?
A little, but I know about it. Yes.
Well, no big deal. But there's this one, and I'm not a big Trekker, but this reminds me. In one of the really old, the James Kirk one, they were introduced to this game that completely just that's all you could see was the game. And this was in the 60s,
Yeah.
It's quite amazing because, like I'll go to the gym and there's all these young guys and they're sitting on the weight machines, but they're sitting there texting. They actually aren't working out on the weight machine. They're not working out on them.
They're getting their finger exercise.
Yeah, they're literally, and the thing is, like, I'll want to work on a machine, and they'll be sitting there for 10, 15 minutes on the machine. They cannot let go of this thing. I've seen fathers and sons in the weight room at the Y. The father will be on his text while the son is, working out, like a little son, maybe he's 8 or 9, and then he puts his phone away and he sits down and the son takes his phone out, and there's no actual like communication between the two of them. So this is I find that this is a huge alarming problem.
Yeah. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I don't know. I imagine the speed of light must be faster, but I don't really know.
Audre Lorde, the poet, said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Yvonne Rainer responded, said, "You can if you expose the tools." What new tool do you suggest?
I actually would suggest the older the tool, the better in terms of
Yeah,
uh, in my art practice. Even though I use digital technology quite a bit, uh, but I use it always in the service of um, the body. Like
yeah,
I call it warm technology.
yeah,
A lot of
right,
times, and this has been going on for 20, 25 years. You go to a performance, you'll see a digital artist and they'll sit on a stage and they have a computer and they're just like at the computer. And they might be creating really beautiful sounds or whatever, but there's like nothing going on the stage.
yeah,
There's just these people. And I'm not saying that I'm not dissing that, but for example, years ago, with someone you'll be interviewing in January. I co-wrote an opera, and one of the things that I was doing at the time, I was a clown for 10 years. I made my living as a clown, and that was actually part of the time when I know your friend Hank Rosenfeld.
yeah.
We were both involved with a group called Bond Street Theater Coalition, and we did a lot of work with them. And I learned how to stilt dance during a residency I had at an arts. They had like an arts residency up in the Catskills, and it was great because I'd been a gymnast when I was a kid, and I would see, and I was there as a composer, but I'd look out my window and I'd see these literally like clowns on a little clown car, like going past my window. I'd look up and I'd see these clowns, and it was magical. And they asked me one day, "Hey, you want to get up on stilts?" And it turned out I was really good at it. But it was because I'd been a gymnast and all these things. But stilts was something that I really brought into my art practice in many ways. And one of the things, long story again, one of the things that I did with my stilts in the late 1990s was I worked with this guy Bob Bilecki. Now Bob was he's kind of famous. He did all of Laurie Anderson's you know sound technology, and wonderful guy. He was working with a company called a little digital nonprofit called Harvest Works in New York City, and I did a lot of work with them. And David Simons and I co-composed this opera, and my character was on stilts, but I wanted to be able to trigger sound. So Bob Bilecki made these little tiny flat, like a little flat rubber disc that I'd put on the bottom of my stilts. And this was the late 1990s. And there was he would use wireless radios. We would tune the radio to a certain, system. And then depending on how hard I stepped, so I was using digital technology, but to enhance the physical being. And that's what I've always done. I've always used warm technology, digital technology, but to create a warmer
Yeah.
observational experience of the human condition, the human body. That's what I'm
Really,
really into.
that you really explained the tool well there. What new toy do you suggest?
Um, well, the thing is, again, I don't know so much about new toys, but like for example, I ceramics. You can take this
Oh,
old technology, which is clay, and you can do a whole bunch of stuff with it. You can use it as an acoustic container. You can use ceramics to project things on. So I would say and again, one of the reasons why I ended up working with ceramics, and I've been now working with them since about 2015, is because I work all the time with digital stuff on, like I make videos, and then I compose on different, software and things like that. And you're just sitting there. We have this thing called finale neck, where you're
Yeah.
just sitting. And I really wanted to, I wanted to break out of that as an artist, because it's one thing to be a vocalist and to use your body, which I did and do a lot. But I wanted to find an art form that would really involve real tactile,
Yeah.
really touching and forming things. But so I would say that clay, which is, I don't know, it's one of the oldest things, because after the
Yep.
primordial soup worked itself out, we ended up with a bunch of clay, right, under the surface of the earth. But you can use clay and use it as a new tool. So I think that reaching back again into what we've made for ourselves and reconsidering how we can use it is, to me, much more appetizing than reaching into like software. Even
Yeah.
though I use software, I find that the older I get, the more I want to, like the other day, Dave and I took a walk by the on the Hudson. There's a beautiful place called the Hook.
Yeah.
Um, and the tide happened to be low when we were walking along the Hook. It's along the Hudson River in Nyack. And now this is a piece of this. There's nothing really exceptional about this. It's a piece of concrete, but it has a whole bunch of really old rocks embedded in it. And it
Yeah.
probably came from, like, I don't know, a loading dock that is
Yeah.
no longer. But to me, this was worth picking up,
Yep.
because there's something about this, the idea that it's something that, humankind, probably men at the time, made this concrete pier. But since then, all of these really interesting things that are, I mean, these rocks are probably, I don't know, 10,000 years old. I don't even know. Who knows? But that's beautiful. That's a
It
beautiful
is. It's
collaboration.
like,
It's a collaboration,
yeah.
of materials.
And you were able, it's like I got to take the walk with you guys, find that, and now you're showing it to me. It's really beautiful. Lisa, what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I'm having my vodka, by the way. Oh, the interesting thing is, I can sleep pretty well when I go to bed. It's 2 or 3 hours into it that there's just so many things to worry about. There's It's so easy to be overwhelmed right now. Uh, I am constantly struggling with the amount of media and news I take in, because I
Yeah.
just can't. I get, the container gets full, and I can't. So I can't even answer it, because of
Yeah.
course it has to do with my own self and things that I worry about. But it's more, and this is when you talk about meaning, since shortly before COVID, I really started talking about, to my friends, people who would understand what I was talking about. It's not that nobody, not that, but people who I knew would understand, like, where I was coming from. That, it's harder and harder to find meaning as an artist. Um, I have the utmost respect for artists who can just keep making stuff,
Yeah.
painting. I mean, I'm not that kind of artist, but I have a lot of respect for them. But in terms of what I go to bed with and, wake up with, because I tend to, my anxieties tend to come up in the middle of the night, is the existential question of, for me, it's, when will we extinct ourselves? How
Yeah.
long is it going to be? I had a conversation with somebody the other day that thinks it's going to be 10 years. And I was like, no, 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 come on. It's going to be at least 200 before we really, really are. I brought up Mad Max, and I said, come on, we're going to have these weird little, you know, um, uh, you know, uh, strange villages of people. It's not like everybody's going to just disappear, but those
Yeah.
are the things that I am concerned with. There's nothing. I don't feel that there's anything I can do about it. And
Yeah.
yet I keep wanting to contribute to the conversation by creating projects that I feel are meaningful to me as an artist. But
Yeah.
as much as I would love to just like, oh, I'm going to make a pastel, and when I have the time, I love to sit down and make something beautiful, like with chalk. I love that. But that's actually not something that I'm able to do as much as I would wish.
Yeah. Lisa, McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're like radar,
Mhm.
distant early warning system. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so
Yeah.
that so we might be able to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. So, Lisa, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Well, because this word "we" is really there isn't one "we." You
Yeah.
know, that's like a that's one of the big problems, you know, uh so artists are I had a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, with two lady friends actually. I just took an installation down that was up in Poughkeepsie, New York, from a gallery called Women's Work Gallery. And it was a wonderful installation. It was a small gallery. It was all women artists. I'm not an artist who just makes women art, but this was a beautiful gallery called Women's Work, and it was about artists who are making work that reflect women artists from literary history. I happen to have a piece about Virginia Woolf that I had done. I happen to have another piece about George Eliot. So I was lucky enough to have these two videos in the piece. And we were talking. We were taking it down. It was before we took it down, and I took my friend, the curator, Stephanie Russell, out to lunch. We were talking about what it is to be an artist, like what it is. And you talk about the we. And I was saying how some artists, um, that's really all they do. You know, and more power to them. Artists who really are just taken with this journey of, and they eat and they do different things in their lives, but it's really about the art. So when you talk about the we, I'm the kind of artist who I like to make a soup. I like to make a pot of soup. If I'm finished with or if I need a little break, my husband and I will play badminton, or I like to sew, or I'm gonna make but all of these things that I do somehow feed into my art practice. It's a weird thing. It's like a mysterious thing.
Yeah.
Um, Now I'm going to try to sew this together for you. I happen to have a certain number of students right now when we talk about the we. I've always assumed, as a professor who teaches this course about cross-cultural perspectives, cultural anthropology, that students will be open to various ideas, transgender issues, the growing intersex community that's kind of emerging as a result of a lot of the research that's being done in this country about the number of people in the world who are actually born with anomalous gender, uh, uh, biological anomalies. There's just so many things, veiling, women in veiling, the kinds of rituals that various cultures do. I've always thought that my students, I thought of them as we're all going to be really interested in finding out about these things. But what I'm finding out, and it's since COVID or it's since the last administration, that there's a kind of crop of students who are not amenable to knowing. So when we talk about we, suddenly I'm feeling this, I really feel this disparity
Yeah.
between me assuming that we're all interested in something. I'm literally going through struggles right now with some of my students because they literally, they'll say, this coursework disgusts me, you
Yeah.
know, things that and it's like, oh my God, Lisa,
Yeah.
wake up. You know, are you naive to think that we are all going to feel a certain way? And this is, so I don't know how to even begin to deal with this idea that of the, well, for example, today, Raphael Warnock, wow, he won
Wow.
today, you know?
Amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. And so we have these, we have these little things. It's like I said to Dave today, hey, something really good happened today. You know,
Yeah.
but but there's no royal we anymore.
Yeah.
Not in this day and age.
Do artists have moral obligation?
Well, I'm an atheist, and yet, uh, not in yet, but because I'm an atheist, I think maybe I spend more time looking at the kind of moral territory of morality that we set for ourselves. For example, in this country, it's different. Every culture is different. Um, so, but how many times have you seen an artist's work and then you might read something about an artist and it's like, ew, that's creepy, you know, but you like their work, but you don't like their, you know, they don't necessarily practice what they preach.
No.
I have my feeling is that, that's my gig in this life. To I have this unfortunately very strong uh, um, impulse to righteous indignation,
Yes.
and sometimes get me into trouble. But that's just me, you know. Morality is something that, if you are a religious person, it'll end you up in hell, or I don't know, someplace in purgatory or whatever. But when you don't attach that religious kind of the toxicity of whatever you do from moment to moment to that kind of, you know, template, um, it morality then becomes a bit different, or the things that we interpret as a moral code. I
Yeah.
mean, I feel that. Uh, I mean, I even get to the point where in my house up in here in Rockland, we live in a forest at the edge of a wetland. You know, I'm carting out spiders and stuff outside rather than, you know, okay, if I'm vacuuming, I'll say to everybody, okay, zero tolerance on vacuuming, you know, so I'll suck up the spiders, whatever. But I actually, you know, but I actually do, the older I get, attach more and more importance to, I don't know, preserving life, you
Yeah.
know, the preservation of life, you know.
Beautiful. So can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them? You already mentioned the one where you recognize the word, but can you conjure up a memory, not verbally, that's an early memory or the earliest?
Uh, I have a couple, but one is when I was a kid, we lived with. So I come from Buffalo. I'm a Buffalo girl, and I grew up in a neighborhood that was eventually appropriated by what they call the Kensington Expressway. So I lived in a house on a street called Oakmont, and this was before the expressway basically bought up all the houses and, you know, raised the neighborhood. But we lived with my grandma on the top floor and her sister, and my grandfather died when I was 9 months old, and we lived on the bottom floor. And it was my little sister wasn't born yet, so it was three kids and my parents. I don't know how I have this memory, but I think it was a summer's day, and I must have been maybe 2.5. I was walking, and my mom put me down for a nap. But then the next thing I knew, I was like running down the sidewalk, you know, stark naked. And And I just remember being whisked up by my mother or somebody. I think it was my mom, but that's one of my, but it was so wonderful, you know.
Yeah.
I was just running down the street and I just didn't have any clothes on and it was just, wonderful.
You were getting ready for a career in dance. So is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Oh, I think it's a blessing. But
Yeah.
of course, memory is not objective, and there are those who will say that no memory is that memory is really in the eye of the beholder. That, like, I don't know if you have any siblings, but if you sit around and you say, "Hey, remember that time?" and everybody will have a different memory. Everyone's
Mhm.
memory is different, but it's
Yep.
really important because it's but memory goes way farther back than that. It,
Yeah.
it's our DNA.
Yep.
We have these little tiny units of memory. That's what one of the things that keeps us. Um, that's one of the things that we've selected in terms of our cellular structure. We actually are made up of DNA, and DNA. We carry memory around. We're like we're banks. We're memory banks.
Yeah. Lisa, really good. Uh, Tell me someone just briefly within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Well, that would be my grandmother, Maria Stocker. Um, so
Would
my
you
grand
main What did you mainly get from her?
um, she was a very empathetic person. Um, my family is German, and my grandmother came over during the around 1920, during one of the Great Depressions in Germany, and they would send money. So my grandmother and my mother was like 1 years old, and they made it to Buffalo. And they kept sending money back to
Wow.
bring the rest of their family. Which who does that now? No, many people do that now.
Yeah.
Many cultures do that now, but it's something that I'm not as familiar with. It's something that
No.
I haven't had to do. Uh, but my grandmother, fast forward about 65 years, 60 years, and she lived in a project in Buffalo. Um, and all it was very multiculti, very it was great. But it was a low income project.
Yeah.
My grandmother lived on the first floor. She kept her door wide open, wide open, so that and she sat near the door and she would peel her apples and read her newspaper or whatever. But whenever anyone would come in, she would see him and they would all say, "Hi, hi, Grandma Stalker," or whatever they would call her, "Hi, hi, Marie." And when I was about 17, I went back to Germany to visit relatives. Actually, my family farm is still in Germany. The dairy farm that my father's family established about 350 years ago. So
Wow.
I went back to this area and I started, and I looked up relatives and I went on this whole series of visits. And the thing that I found out on these visits, every place I went to, I'd get a huge piece of cake and they, like feed me. They give me like what they call sect, which is our version of champagne, but it's just like a wonderful white bubbly wine. And they'd all give me like 20 marks. This was in 1973 or whatever. But they would all through an interpreter, whoever was there would speak enough English. They would all tell me that they were thanking me through my grandmother, who during the war would send them like coffee, money, nylons. My grandmother would do this.
Yeah.
So the thing is, even though I'm not my grandmother, I really learned from her that you look outside. And when I first moved to New York City in 78 or 9, um, you see homeless people, and maybe some people after a certain period of time you become inured to it, you don't see it anymore, but that never happened to me, and I think it has a lot to do with my grandmother, that she always saw,
Yeah.
I don't know, she just saw need in her wonderful way. She wasn't a big activist or anything, but she was really an empathetic, generous, kind person. So I would say that my grandmother had a real big effect.
Yeah, I think that word empathy really came through loud and clear. And Lisa, someone just briefly outside your immediate family who had an impact on you, and what specifically was that impact?
There's a lot of people who have, but harking back to my reading, the fact that I'm such a voracious reader,
Yeah,
and a lot of my or actually, yeah, a lot of the things that I write poetry and things like that, and I've done things based on my own work, but from time to time, I've been able to work with authors that I really admire. And I was a big Doris Lessing fan. And it's when you're an artist, but you're not like necessarily in the commercial world, a lot of your projects end up in the filing cabinet. And if you can get them out of the filing cabinet, it's a wonderful thing. And about when I was 18 or 19, I started working on the idea for an opera. It was based on a novel by a South African writer named Olive Schreiner. She wrote The Story of an African Farm. And it's a beautiful novel if you ever want to read it. And but I found out through a series of essays that Doris Lessing wrote, who grew up actually in what became Zimbabwe. She grew up in I guess it was called Rhodesia. She A mentor for her was Olive Schreiner, who had been born in the late 1800s. So I read about this, and I'd been working on this opera, and I just thought to myself, well, I could write to Doris Lessing. I can do it. I can, I can. And I'd seen her read at Symphony Space and just loved her. I just read everything she ever wrote. So I wrote to her because I was wondering if she had anything to advise about Olive Schreiner's life or about this opera. I didn't know what to call the opera, and then I kind of forgot about it. And I was living in the East Village at the time on East 6th Street. I remember I got the mail. I was on my way out somewhere, and I got my mail and walking down the street, and I have this letter. It's from England, and I forgot, and I open it up, and it's a letter from Doris Lessing.
Wow.
She wrote me a letter, and not just a letter, but she talked to me about this. Olive Schreiner in her novels would sort of write about she would give like kind of mythic anecdotes in her stories, and one of those anecdotes was based on the Persian myth of the Simurgh. Now, the Simurgh is there's this idea that, and you've probably heard this, it runs through many different spiritual practices, that if you see a white feather in your path, does this sound familiar?
No, please tell me. I'm learning.
Okay, so if you're walking along and there's a white feather, and you pick this feather up, it's a white feather, it represents truth. And if you pick it up, your responsibility is to follow it. You have to follow it. It's the bird. It fell from this bird, and the bird is true. You got to follow this bird. And Schreiner wrote about this in her book called The Story of an African Farm. There's a chapter about this person called the stranger. It's a beautiful, beautiful chapter. But I'd always been so like, oh my God, this chapter just, it just rang so true. So when I wrote to Doris, and I told her about this chapter, and I didn't know anything about it. She wrote back to me about this Persian myth, and she gave me the title for my opera. She said, this is called The Simurgh. And she gave me, and even though I've done parts of the opera over the past 40 years, and maybe I will realize this opera someday, that's really not the point. The point is that Lessing was one of those people in my life who like who lit the roadway. Have you ever heard in Indonesian cultural kind of mythology, especially in Bali, there's this thing called layaks. Do you know what a layak is?
No, spell it.
I think it's Leyak, layak. A,
Okay.
a layak is like a ghost.
Okay.
And the Balinese they just take this in their stride. So here's an interesting, this is a Marshall McLuhan kind of story. When television first came to Indonesia, not everybody had it, but maybe somebody had it, and then everybody in the village would go to their house and they would watch TV, right? But the story is when they would leave this person's house after watching whatever TV they would watch, and they would be walking along the road would be lined with TV layaks, little ghosts of TV sets.
Wow.
Now, isn't that a beautiful image?
Yes.
And my partner in life, my husband David Simons, who you will interview in January, might talk to you more about this. He made a piece about layaks, but I'm just going to take this idea of these ghosts, and I'm very involved in the hauntological sort of meanings of things, meaning that as McLuhan talks about, that we're always hauling our past along with us. We're hauling it along, and we're looking backwards, but we're moving forwards. And I think also Benjamin talks about this weird angel that's actually backwards, but is being led forwards. And I'm not making a lot of sense with that part. However, this idea of Lessing giving me this little this simmer, this layak, that it's like a little ghost that I get to follow, and that's what this white feather is. This idea
Yeah.
that you pick up this little thing and you follow it to its end, and
Yeah.
it's ghostly because it's not something you can't say it's there. I got it. It's never going to be there. You're always going to be like truth. You're never going
Yeah.
to be there. You're never going to be there.
Yeah. Well, great. This is really beautiful. And you're so articulate. You help me envision with your words, being an artist visually. I really got this sense of walking down this street or this road after you watch TV. How do you spell simmer? S
Simurgh, simmer,
G.
and
Yeah.
it's actually a Persian myth.
Yeah. No, that's really important. And in the McLuhan line that he quotes constantly is, the Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well
Yeah,
as they can.
and the thing is, there's no difference between because well, I composed for Gamelan Orchestra for about 15 years. I made an opera, a Gamelan opera. I worked with a group called Gamelan Son of Lion for many years. Wonderful group, whose founder passed away a few years ago, Barbara Benari. But the Balinese, especially when you visit them in their villages, of course, many of them are virtuosic musicians and also virtuosic painters or artisans. But that's not all they do. They have their day jobs. They raise their kids. In Bali, for example, if you build a new house, you don't just move into it. You have to go through this whole series of things that allows the house to be acknowledged by the community. It gets blessed. It's not just, there's nothing everyday, even though there's an everyday quality to it, that the Balinese don't distinguish between the highfalutin art and the mundane part of your day. And I
Yeah.
think that's something that I've glommed onto. That it's interesting. Like if I'm doing a big concert, which I still do from time to time, I get invited to vocalize and to be the soloist. But the thing that usually makes me feel calmest before I do that, I'll have to do something really mundane, like, I don't know, wash the floor, sew a
Yeah.
few buttons on. I really have to do that because otherwise, um, I don't know. The you make a great leap when you do something on stage. It's a
Yeah.
really and it can be quite exhausting actually.
Yep.
You give something and then oftentimes as happens when you do either a performance or an installation, there's that little bit of depression that sets in,
Yeah.
afterwards. So I find that the more mundane I can be beforehand, it kind of evens it out a little bit so that I don't get too big for the saddle, if you know what I mean.
It's really, really well put, and I agree with you. Were you raised a particular religion?
Well, that's interesting because my family, uh, so the story goes that my dad was Protestant, I think, Protestant, and my mom was raised Catholic, but I don't think their families put a big onus on religion. And when they were married, back in those days, I guess in the maybe 49, 50. If you had two religions, you couldn't just waltz into a church and get married. They wouldn't let you do it. So
Yeah.
they had to get married, I think, in like a city hall sort of thing. And maybe because of their ambivalence about religion, we were never baptized. Which, when I was a kid, it was kind of thrilling. My friends would say, "Oh, you're going to go to hell," if you're not baptized. But because of that, I never even though I, I sampled and um, swam around in different religious kinds of I would try a church out, or I did a lot of different meditative practices when I got older. Um, my family not being religious, I think, was a very good thing for me. Even though we did the Christmas, we did the Easter, but there was never any religious quotient to that. It was just more tradition. We had these traditions which I loved,
Yeah.
but I was never made. You know how and this is something that I sometimes bring up in my classes. Children, little babies, baptized, they are Catholic. They don't have a choice about it. They're
Yeah.
just that's our and it makes it quite difficult, I think, uh, repatterning your belief system if you've been really inoculated. I mean, not inoculated. What would you call it? Indoctrinated.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to change the pattern. So I am actually I'm kind of grateful for that because it made it possible for me to really understand why my atheism was a really organic and right thing for me to land on finally. But it took me a while.
Lisa, do you pray?
No, I don't pray.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
God doesn't exist.
Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Well, we've created this. Uh, we have the word evil. It's a word that we've made, um, and it's it's very hard. Like, I'm from Buffalo. The top shooting last year. Um, it's really hard to make the room for people who do things that are so destructive uh, uh, to the human condition. I think that what we think of as evil, and of course, on a bad day, I'm not going to name names, but there are certain people that I would really like to just like bye bye, But they are products of their products, um, and they're products because as human beings we have flaws. We have some really big design flaws. Um, a friend of mine took a course once, good examples of bad design, right? And as human beings, this is one of our really bad design flaws that uh, I don't know why, and it's too bad, but we'll probably we won't work it out, I think, before we extinct ourselves. But avarice, um, the absence of empathy, which I think has more to do with a biological imbalance, a chemical imbalance, people who actually can't feel empathy, or people who have been, I've worked with like little kids or teenagers who've been in such an emotionally dysfunctional environment that they're irreparably damaged, and that leads them to do things that are just very hard to take in. But I don't know if I don't know if evil is, because then I'd have to say that it belongs in a, a realm that I can understand. And I really feel that I'm a big believer in science, but I also do believe in magic and things like that. But I believe in it as far as um, science is able to really give us more and more, and as the conversation of science is able to be more and more, like there could be one hub for science that many scientists can plug into, that can really um, help us to understand why something is the way it is. We are still, as who was it that Horace Minor wrote this really interesting satire called Nasi Rema, and it's a satire about the American culture, but seen through the eyes of someone who has no context for American culture. So they make it sound as if we're this really wild race of people, but the idea. I don't want to lose my train of thought here because I was going on a big limb. The idea that we are um, capable of seeing, one of the problems is we keep separating ourselves so that there's
Yeah.
the other,
Yep.
other. And that's one of the reasons why a guy named Wade Davis, who talks about the ethnosphere, um, and the fact that as this is colonizing and all this, we're so predictable, appropriating land, using the resources, crowding the people off of it. Uh, so getting back to this idea that we are really imperfect,
Yeah.
and we're our own worst enemy, and we're not going to probably get around to fixing this flaw before we you know before we leave the planet to itself again and allow it to. And it can happen really quickly. We saw during COVID, if you leave people off the roads long enough or a factory long enough, animals start coming back, you know,
Amazing.
the climate starts fixing itself again. Unfortunately, we won't be around to see it, but that's how it is. That's how it is.
Yeah. Well, Lisa, the sort of hidden question there is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I set it up with a few modern thinkers. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the samurai and the mob. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is how do you, Lisa, advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, you mentioned Coppola. Did you know who Coppola's roommate in college was?
Tell me.
Trump.
I didn't know that.
Donald
Wow.
Trump was Coppola's roommate in college.
Wow.
So ask the question again, based on.
How do you, well, the question is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
So I live in Rockland County, and I'm going to pass.
That's
I'm
fine.
gonna pass.
Yeah, it's
We can
sort of like,
talk about it later when I'm
yeah,
not on.
well, it's sort of like uh Ram Dass says an amazing thing, because you
Mhm,
talked about empathy.
mhm.
He says, I'm having a real hard time loving George Bush. So it's like fill in the blank. I'm having a real hard time loving Trump or loving Putin or whoever, you know. So it's like, how do you, you know, it's how do we deal with this? Is the big question. Like, it's called conflict resolution in the long run, you know.
Of course, there are those who really train in this, who actually FDU, where I teach at Fairleigh Dickinson University in Teaneck. We actually have a new department now, the Department of Empathy. And
Really?
yeah, and you can actually you can register to take like a 3-day course in empathy, which it's a beautiful thing. It's a
Yeah.
great idea. Um, I am even though I am a person who, it's weird because I am a person who does feel a great deal of empathy. There are certain places where I have blind spots, and Rockland County has a problem, which I have made documentaries about. Um, so Rockland County, it's not necessarily a new county. It's across the river, the Hudson River, from Westchester. But about maybe 20 years ago, um, the Hasidim began to move to Rockland County, and not just to Rockland County, but up and down the eastern seaboard. But we have a problem now in Rockland County because the Hasidim are not a community that assimilates with any other community. Their religious imperative keeps them um, from socializing with any other group. But it goes much deeper than that. They occupy the town boards, they occupy the school boards, um, and they are changing the the um, the climate of this county, and it's a big problem.
Yeah.
And I've made a few documentaries about it in the past. But so I'm a hypocrite when you ask me this question, because I I so far have not been able, and nobody is. We're not able. We're not able to come to any kind of a. We can't agree to agree, uh,
Yeah.
and this is really a big problem. And I wish that I, was like had such a big why. I wish that I was so open, but I find that I have challenges in this way. That
Yeah.
that it's just beyond me how Rockland County will ever come to terms with what is happening to it.
Yeah.
The result of a very strong um, presence that is appropriating uh,
Yeah.
large portions of the county, and more and more. It's in the
Well,
news,
yeah.
but
Well, Lisa, it's amazing what you're bringing up, because it touches on Nassim Taleb says this quote: games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, you don't know who really won or lost, but
Mhm.
you can tell who a hero is and who is not. So when I read that to someone, they said, well, villains don't think they are bad. They they want control. and heroes want freedom. And so it led me to this next question, in that, you study anthropologist Gregory Bateson said, when you catch a criminal, do they go, wow, I'm doing something morally and socially wrong? Or do they go, well, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day. I got caught.
Damn.
So, damn. So the basic question is, does punishment work?
Um, okay, so a lot of the penal system in this country seems to have been taken over by private, I don't
Yeah.
know, money making. Well,
It's called
monetizing.
the prison industrial
Right.
complex. Yeah.
Now, the thing is, there are many, 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 many people who, because of, you can't just like, it's not a flat surface, this person. This person's got this whole thing behind them. Ontology, here they go, hauling it along. And whether you're talking about marginalized groups or people who grow up in, cycles of poverty or whatever you're talking about, um, I think a large percentage of these people are actually waiting for somebody to say to them, to offer them a way of breaking that pattern, which could happen in an institution where they're being incarcerated. And there are programs that are great programs,
Yeah.
Shakespeare programs, and
Yep.
there's just like a whole bunch of things that could, if the money was there, that could really kind of turn around these systems. So that's on the one hand.
Yeah.
But if you're dealing with something that I might think of as a cult, let's say, a religious cult, or a group of people who are only seeing, they're only seeing this. They can't really see anything else. It's just this. It's really hard then to have a conversation with a person or with a group that literally cannot know what you're talking about. They can't know it. If they know it, and I have a few students like this right now, they cannot know what it is you're suggesting. It's very threatening to them to know, like, if you're, the whole idea of college, is to expand your point of view, to create kind of using scholarship and academic sort of tools to say, while you're here, look at this, look at that. Hey, read about this.
Yeah.
But there are a number of students, I'm finding actually more and more, that they don't want to look at it. They do not, because they have the stance that they've already got. But then if you look in terms of what I was talking about with Rockland before, there's no possibility. You can have a dialogue, a very limited dialogue, but only until you touch upon the parameters of their belief system. And you just can't, that's it. You can't go farther than that. Otherwise, you're threatening the whole edifice. You're threatening the edifice. And that's, I think, with most people that you find, you can have, like, we're having this great conversation. It's really fun, and it's making me think a lot. And we could go on ad infinitum. But there are other folks that would not be able to, um, jump over these what do you call it when you're running and pole vaulting, and not pole vaulting, but
Hurdles.
yeah. There's a lot of people that they can't jump over those hurdles, because the price of that would be to question who they are. Then they have to look at their family. Then they have to look at their community, and that's very frightening. It's more than frightening. You could be in many different belief systems. You'll be shunned. You'll lose your whole social community. And as weird as that sounds, that's one of the reasons why a lot of times these conversations, they can't happen, or it's very difficult to make it happen. I don't know how to do it.
Yeah. Well, you brought, McLuhan had a great line. He goes, carefully make plans, then do the opposite. That takes courage,
Mhm,
and it's risky to believe the opposite of what you're set in your ways and
mhm.
really tackle that.
Oh,
But
well, I'm just gonna quickly say, there
yeah.
was a great novel that came out of this area of Rockland, a guy who lived in Muncie. You might wanna read. It's called Foreskin's Lament. And it was written by a fellow who grew up in the Hasidic community, who, he went through the whole, very difficult process of um, becoming illuminated
Yeah,
to things outside of his religious community. And it's a great novel, Foreskin's Lament.
yeah. No, it's amazing when people do that. You can jump out of your comfort zone and experience things. And so, Utah Phillips, the great folk singer, said, "Anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people.
Yes.
Who's in who's entitled to make the rules?"
Um, well, that's a very tricky and sticky wicket because um, we have to live together, right? So, like when you leave your house in the morning, and if you drive to the coffee shop or whatever, you got to stop at the stoplight. I mean, otherwise, or and and if you park in the in a handicap zone, if you're not handicapped, so there's these basic things that everybody has to agree on, right? Um, and I don't know. And then after that, I mean, is it cowboy land? Is it, like where does it end? You have to, and this is this is why you know what was it, the James Dean, Rebel with a Cause, Rebel with a
Yeah,
Cause,
rebel without a cause. Yeah.
without a cause. That there's these moments where you have to make peace with, and I mean, in the end, especially today, you really can't isolate yourself to the point where you're not socializing with anybody. I mean, in a way, you really kind of can't. If you have to get food somehow, you have to be, you can't really, you can't hone it down to the fact that I'm just going to be just me. There's not going to be anybody else, just me. So yeah, we human beings have to agree on a certain set of criteria that will allow you to move freely, from point A to point B. But at the same time, um, we have these, amazing, things in our craniums that give us full liberty in a way. Um, this is going to sound so naive, but as long as we don't like kill anybody or hurt
Yeah.
anybody, or
No. That doesn't sound naive. That's exactly what we know. That does not be kind and do no harm to other people. That's like really basic.
Yeah, except that for some people, that's like a threatening proposition. I
It
don't know
is.
why. I don't.
Yeah. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
You have to start with conviction, and then you have to figure out, like for example, as an artist, um, I used to do a lot of uh, collaborating with other, like I'd go to Estonia or I'd go to Indonesia, and so I would have an idea, I'd get some funding, I get the whole, I get it all spinning, and then I'd go to another place, and you're kind of like a diplomat as an artist. You have to, you're representing your cultural milieu. But the interesting thing is, an artist goes someplace with an idea, and then you come smack up against the culture that you want to work with. And so you're going like, yeah, but I want to, yeah, but I'd like to. And then you get to keep maybe 60% of what you want to do because you
Yeah.
have these convictions, but you have to then start compromising and collaborating. It's actually more like, I would prefer to think of it as collaborating rather than compromising, that at a certain point, you just can't
Yeah.
come in there with all your, your guns blazing, and you can't do that. You have to, if you can, if you can manage to hold on to some of your original, um, your original source material, but then you have to compromise, you have to collaborate, you have to
Yeah.
do it, you have to.
Well, I like you expanding the words to collaborate because, it's my oldest question for 40 years. What's more important, conviction or compromise? And it took 25 years before someone says, depends on what you mean by important. But, you know, I want to get into art, but I was wondering if we could do a part 2 another time because I asked for 90 minutes and we're already at the 90-minute point. So, it's like we really covered a lot of the basic, um, pre getting into the field you're in, and you're in so many fields that I want to explore because I'm very curious about performance art, being a clown, stilts, and then your installations and your music. I mean, I got to watch some of the piece on the CD you
Oh,
sent,
great, Bertha George, yeah.
the Birth of George on YouTube, and it was just so exciting to
Oh.
see you on those stilts and hear the type of music that you work with. But what you just said reminded me of two quotes. A Michigander, Paul Schrader, the guy who wrote Taxi Driver, he said, "The role of the artist is to attempt to sell out but fail," which is, a funny, comment, which is a funny comment because a lot of people can comment on it either way. And then Al Flipside, who put out the punk magazine in LA for 20 years and spawned everybody, he says, don't sell out, sneak in.
That's a nice idea. Lawrence Durrell says something like the role of the artist is to exude olive oil and garlic.
Oh, I like that.
And it's about okay. Well, here's maybe just to end this, or however we're going to do this.
Yeah.
Part of my conversation with my lady friends the other day, who when I was taking down this installation, was this idea of of selling your art. Now the thing
Yeah.
is, it would be wonderful to be a non-commercial artist and to be able to pay my rent doing that. And there has been times in my life when I've been able to do it, but it's really, really difficult to do this.
Yeah.
But the other part of this is, I have to make money, right? I have to make money to pay my rent, and
Yeah.
so the acceptable way. So I was a clown for 10 years, and I made pretty good money. And what better way to make money, you know?
Whoa.
And so that was good. I felt like, okay, I'll sell. I can sell that. I can sell my clown. I can sell myself in that way. But as an educator, this is one of the ways that I feel that I'm okay with making money
Yeah.
as an educator. But this is a big problem in my art because I I don't I don't sell my art. It's not for sale necessarily.
Yeah.
It's not that I don't think that it could be, but that's never how I've seen it. Um, I I've gotten grants and different kinds of support
Yeah.
that pay for the project. They pay for the project, but
Yeah.
usually out of like I don't know, if I get 25 or $30,000, I might get 1,200 of that.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. But so for me, that's also something that I haven't worked out in myself, and I still feel quite ambivalent about is I don't want to sell anything
I
unless
agree.
I feel that it's a good thing to make money at, and
Yeah.
that's how it is. That's how it is.
No, I totally agree because I know a professional performance artist. When I told her that, um, Marina Abramovich, sold a videotape for 70 grand,
Whoop.
of a performance piece. She goes, "That's bullshit." And I goes, "Dude, she raised the bar on your art form.
She can
You
get
can."
away with it. Go,
Yeah,
go for
if
it.
that's both what McLuhan and, Andy Warhol said, "Art is anything you can get away with."
It's true. It's true. In like 1997, I went on a tour to Germany, and one place I performed was a little town called Mainz in Germany. We performed at a beautiful little spot there. I was taking my own concert around, and I was, or was it Mainz? Anyway, I was talking to one of the organizers, and he was saying how um, Karen Finley had
Yeah,
been there the year before.
yeah.
Now, this is back in the days where they would literally pay for you to fly back and forth. They
Yep.
would give you an artist fee. You would really feel like, whoa, in Europe, it was like, wow, you know, and that was, that was in terms of the soul, it was food for the soul. But this organizer told me that they'd had, and God bless Karen Finley, but they'd had her there the year before to do a 30-minute lecture for which they paid her $30,000. And I
Wow.
just thought, wow, there's a way to monetize what you do, you know. And and there are artists who are able to do it, and
Yeah.
I'm not criticizing them at all, but
No, I know,
I
I
just
know.
didn't get there. I haven't gotten there.
Yeah.
Maybe I will someday. I'm a late bloomer. Who knows?
And believe me, I'm way more like you. Is like, once you learn that whole world, it's better just to don't get the commerce involved. Just make your art and make it. And then, however you can survive, survive. So
Well, and
anyway,
there are also artists who I'm not going to name,
yeah.
do what they do quite well and get paid quite well, and then they paint themselves into a corner because
Yep.
the only way they can make money is doing this. It's masturbatory. They have to do
Totally.
this thing over and over, and
Yeah.
that's absolutely not interesting.
It's not interesting. And another pro artist friend of mine is like, you're owned by your gallery, and they say, okay, crank out 30 paintings. And
Yeah.
it's like,
I don't know what it's like, but okay, I'll believe
yeah.
you.
So, anyways, Lisa, I
Yes.
really hope we can schedule a part two and really get into the art and the music and installation. But let's close. Is that all right if we do a part two?
Anytime you want. I'm happy to return. It's been a
Yeah.
pleasure.
No, this happens every once in a while. It's like usually I get through 40 to 50 questions, and we got through the first 12. So, I mean, it was really fun because you are a very articulate and exciting person with your spoken word, and you communicate a lot to me, and I'm grateful. But why don't we close this one out with
Yes.
this question? And it goes like this. You brought up the word truth.
Okay.
And Louis Buñuel said, "I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it." Now, a lot of people like that quote and they go, "Oh, that sounds good." And then one person said, "No, that's bullshit. Because if I'm going to seek something, I'm seeking it because I want to find it." And so I sort of morphed it into this question. The cliche goes, the journey is more important than the destination. Why do we, and again, I don't want to use this word we, tend to, why do humans tend to think the journey is more important than the destination? Why do humans have to name or seek a destination if the journey is more important?
Well, unfortunately, I think we're, in this culture anyway, entering a period where the destination, it's only about the destination. You can think of it in terms of the pipeline, educational pipelines, or
Yeah.
um, in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Um, and as an artist, the thing is, as soon as you think you found the truth, it's right here, and then it's like, and then it's like, oh, and so I don't know. You can. What is that old saying? Like, as soon as the moment you think you've known everything is when you're truly, you know, you know. So it's more like that. The thing is, you can have your heart can have this thing, or whatever that is, that thing that your heart is attached to, which is your soul or your spiritual being or whatever. Doesn't matter if you're an atheist or a very religious person, whatever. You've got this thing, and it's animating you.
Yeah.
Um, and we'll leave out the we, but individuals tend to be looking for something. Now, I might find the thing that the guy next door to me is looking for to be like something I'm not looking for. But it's none of my business if that's what they're looking for. It's
Yeah.
really none of my business. I can have a conversation about it with them, and it would be wonderful. But at the end of the conversation, off they go, and I'm not going to change that person.
Yeah.
And they're not going to necessarily. Who knows? They might, but they're not necessarily going to change me either.
Yeah.
We're all set on these, and unfortunately many of these pathways will lead us to a wall that we might not be able to scale, but we can try. Like I'll say to my students, we have a section on borders. Well, I mean, there's physical borders, but oh my god, there's so many psychological borders and sexual and relationship borders. But I'll say to my kids, my students, they're not kids, but I'll say the whole point of a wall is to climb over it. That's
Yeah.
the thing.
Beautiful.
That's the point.
Yeah. That's total McLuhan. Turn a breakdown into a breakthrough.
Yeah.
Turn a rejection into a redirection.
Yeah, it might take a couple of days after the rejection, but it's true. It's absolutely true. Once you get whomped with the rejection, it takes a while to but then if you're the person that you are, you'll redirect it, and it'll help. It's true. I'm sorry to say it, but it'll help you grow. I'm sorry to say that, but rejection is good food just as much as
Yeah.
success.
I loved your word womp. And I also love when well, one thing is the flaneurs in Paris in the 20s changed the world and changed our culture forever. And all they did was sit at coffee houses and do nothing. And it's called, you brought up Walter Benjamin, he called it psychogeography. You can just wander aimlessly and you might bump into and have an epiphany, or Joyce said it as have an epiphany in everydayness. You had it walking down along the river and you found that rock. That was almost like an epiphany in your everydayness.
At any moment.
Yeah. And the other one, when you said, fuck,
I wasn't sure if I could say it.
you can say it because it's one of my favorite Alan Watts lines. He says, everybody's trying to figure out who they are. If you figure out who you are, you're fucked.
In my classes, I'll say to my students are used to this by now, I'll say, excuse my French, but this is my students get a kick out of it.
Well, I would like to take your class. And Lisa, it's truly been a privilege and an honor, because it was like a class in learning. It was like PhD in clown therapy and performance art here. But again, I look forward to part 2, and a big thanks to Hank for introducing us.
Oh yeah.
So
love him.
Yes, thank you, Hank. Thank Hank. And so even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast, I will send you possible dates for part 2, and I hope our conversation will never end and just go on forever and ever.
Well, thanks, Jerry. This was actually this whole thing was an epiphany for me, so I really thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Lisa. What a love. That was super,
Toodaloo.
super
Okay.
fun. Toodaloo.